Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today for the Axon Bulletin I'm joined by Anthony Haggerty, Jim Orr and Laura Bradburn. Now, this is going to be an interesting discussion, that's for sure. Anthony, you wake up this morning, back at 7, there's an announcement from Celtic following an announcement at the Stock Exchange. What is your first thoughts on the announcement that Peter Lawwell is retiring from his role at Celtic?
We spoke off air there, and my first thought was, I was telling you, it was song, how I remember, and I'm going to remember Peter Lawwell as a kind of chant. 2 Peter Lawwells, there's only 2 Peter Lawwells. One, the businessman, business fan who sat on the board and did terrific and extraordinary things for the club. And the other one, the meddler, who the fans at the end of his tenure were beginning to turn their ire and fire on. And so that was my first thought. I'm not actually surprised that he's leaving. Mm-hmm. A lot of Celtic fans out there were saying they were shocked, but I'm not in the slightest. But you know, the first Peter Lawwell, you have to take your hat off and doff your cap. He drove this club to become a hugely successful commercial enterprise. You know, they did have an unprecedented period of domestic success, and he won 29 trophies, as he likes to tell you, through that tenure. 13 league titles, 4 trebles, and the last 16 in Europe 3 times. You know, with sound financial footing, they were posting their best results year on year under his tenure. You know, and he played a pivotal role in the appointment of Brendan Rodgers, and the one thing he did do was he oversaw this whole transfer dealings with Celtic players, where clubs from Europe or down south couldn't come and raid your club and commit heist and acts of grand larceny. He got market value for a lot of players playing in the Scottish League, and that's in some of the deals he managed to pull off there. Houdini would have been proud of, you know, just a magician, you know. So Wanyama, Keane, Foster, Van Dijk, Dembele, Kieran Tierney, and latterly Frimpong. So those are the things that I applaud the first Peter Lawwell for, and he deserves every kind of praise that's coming to him. The second one, I can't, because he foisted projects, not tried and tested players, on a succession of Celtic managers. He scuppered deals, important deals. I go back to Stephen Fletcher, John McGinn, Castagna, at various crucial times with the club and the managers, which could have led to winning league titles. And they were important players that Celtic needed to sign, and he wouldn't release the money. He played Russian roulette with the Champions League every time Celtic went into it. And their actual success rate in qualifying for the group stages is no great. Could have been a lot better, and they could have had a lot more financial gain from it. And his legacy will be 29 trophies, but it should have been 30. And the Celtic fans will find that one, that's the hardest one that they'll find to forgive him.
No, you're absolutely right, Anthony.
They do everything. You know, in the Untouchables film, Sean Connery grabs Kevin Costner and says, "What are you prepared to do to Al Capone?" Right? That's the premise of the film. And the Celtic board, I would ask them the same question. What were you prepared to do to land the 10? And the answer this season is they saw the train coming, didn't board it, were ill prepared from the get-go. And as I say, 29 trophies for Lawwell, it's fantastic, brilliant, but there's still that lingering kind of regret that it should be 30, and the fans are all fine. they'll find it hard to forgive and forget that.
Jim, I was talking to you before you came on air there, because obviously you were involved, greatly involved in the Save Our Celts movement, which, it was a street movement. It was very, it was monumental in terms of the fanzines and Celts for Change that came later. And obviously we were able to oust the old board. The incoming regime of Fergus McCann was a huge part of the Celtic history. Is this the biggest upheaval we're going to see since those days of McCann coming in? I mean, we don't have a stadium to build, of course. We might have a share issue at some point in the future. But is this the incoming Dominic Mackay got as big a job on his hands in relation to the upheaval of this club since Fergus McCann? Is it that big?
I don't think so. I think this should be fairly seamless. You're taking one guy out, bringing one guy back in. Just to echo the points that Tony made, because we had a brief chat beforehand, there obviously is two Peter Lawwells, and the one, as Tony said, the one's a guy who manages the business and manages the finance and balances the books and makes some money for the shareholders, and he's like a good guy. But a chief executive, to me, should be invisible. You should know who he is in a football club. But this guy's visible. And why is he visible? Because he keeps coming out his area and getting involved in stuff he really shouldn't get involved in. And all the stuff Tony said, I was going to say the exact same things. Bad decision after bad decision after bad decision in an area that he shouldn't be involved in. Now, if this new guy comes in and he does the same thing, then it won't get any better. So we have to draw some thick lines around what the new guy is going to get involved in. Stick to the finances, stick to the business. Don't come out that thick square line. And I can understand some of the bad decisions that's been made in the past, and I can forgive some of the bad decisions that have been made in the past. But the legacy for me and the legacy for this board is the fact that they did absolutely nothing about over 10 years of cheating. Did absolutely nothing at all. And one of the things that I dislike is this, a club like no other. I hate that phrase. It's like, we are the people for the good guys. It's triumphalist. Don't like it at all. But one of the things that you can say, in terms of a club like no other, I can't imagine any other club in world football being systematically cheated for 10 years and doing absolutely nothing about it. It's back of the bus behaviour for me. And that's the legacy. And what annoys me, if you get back, you always go back further than I'm going to get back, but if we get back to those years, the early 2000s, and I'm a season ticket holder, I'm sure you as well, Paul, possibly you and Laura and Tony as well. I mean, over at least 10 years, I'm buying a season ticket, maybe £400 a time. $4,000 I've paid in to a league that's rigged. $50,000 people like me paying $4,000, what's that? £200 million into a rigged game. And the audacity they have, they put statements out talking about values. We're going to uphold the values of the club. To me, that's the legacy. They've done nothing about it. And if Peter Lawwell wants to have a decent legacy, then he should do something about that before he goes. Because that's the main thing for me. I could understand making bad decisions or making good decisions that turn out bad. I totally understand that. But the bit I don't understand is sitting there and doing absolutely nothing. And I blame Peter Lawwell, I blame the board, because they've let everyone down. Rant over. But the question was, do I think it's going to be as big as upheaval? No, because I think things were completely different back in the early 90s. I think this should be fairly seamless. From what I've seen of the guy, he seems an okay guy. I think us as fans, we always think that we can comment on new players and new managers because we think we know a lot about stuff like that. In terms of appointing a chief executive, I think we'll leave that to the guys on the board to make the right decision. As long as he ticks the boxes for me, then hey-ho and on we go. He looks like he's doing quite a similar job to what he'll be doing just now. He's a kind of local guy as well. It kind of seems to me if you were comparing him to picking a new manager, it seems like kind of Stevie Clark for me. He's a kind of local guy. Knows if you compare it to Steve Clark, if he was to come in, he's somebody who's local, knows the players, has managed here before, so it looks like a safe pair of hands. And we'll see what happens.
When I'm talking about upheaval, I'm looking at the fact that, yes, the management and coaching staff need to be completely reviewed, as does the football operation in relation to will there be a director of football introduced to the football operation. The recruitment aspect of Celtic needs a complete upheaval, as does the youth development of Celtic and potentially even the facilities at Lennoxtown. Then you've got post-COVID, you've got post-Brexit, and you also have the inquiry that's ongoing that obviously Celtic will need to deal with at some point in the future. I feel that we are entering a period of massive upheaval at Celtic. And so one man out, one man in. You know, Peter Lawwell was a powerhouse when it came to figures. He was a powerhouse when it came to negotiation. But he was brought in to deal with all non-football matters. And as Tony quite rightly said, he started getting involved, or maybe he was always involved, far too involved in football matters. So, Laura, when you see a new man coming into that role, how big an upheaval, how many changes are we going to see as football fans?
Well, I think I'm in agreement with Jim as far as, it's going to not be as big an upheaval as, for example, when Fergus McCann came in, because what we need to remember is when Fergus McCann came in, the club was dying. It was hours away from not existing anymore. We are fortunately not in that position anymore. So from that point of view, it should be a smoother transition. It's going to be a bigger transition than when it went from Fergus McCann to Peter Lawwell, obviously because Fergus McCann's tenure at the club was not anywhere near as long. There are going to be people watching this, people contributing to the pod over the week, people who have followed Celtic for a number of years who will not remember a time before Peter Lawwell. So from that point of view, it is in itself, a massive change. I would probably say that I don't share a lot of Jim's views on him. I think he has mismanaged the club a lot in recent years. It's a bit like Game of Thrones to me. The past 10 years, the first 5 years of it was amazing. We peaked with Peter Lawwell, and now this season he's just been flying around on a big dragon, setting fire to everything. But on the whole, I'm glad the change is coming. I do think we need to, as we have already said, praise him for the financial job he's done. We've seen what happens plenty of times when clubs get financially mismanaged, and I'm thankful to know that I will have a club going forward, mostly based on the work that he's done. But as we've said as well, he's this kind of Jekyll and Hyde character where you would rather that he didn't get involved in the footballing side of things. What I would like to see in terms of, you asked about whether there will be a big upheaval, I would like that to be the major change. I would like the Dominic Mackay coming in to focus on what he is good at, communications, financial management, commercial growth, all that kind of stuff, which unfortunately is a part of the modern game. But if he does that part of his job well, there's no need for him to get involved in the footballing side, and that's all that we ask from somebody in his position. Do your part of the job well, leave the footballing side to the other people who do their job well. Hopefully that will be a new manager of a higher calibre, but as far as that's concerned, we just need to wait and see.
Paul, there are similarities with the Fergus McCann thing that you've touched on, right? And I would love Dominic Mackay to give his State of the Nation address, right? The way Fergus did, right? Fergus came in and said, give me 5 years, I'll put 9 million in, I'll take 5 times my dough out, I'll build you a stadium fit for purpose, and I'll build you a team capable of winning the league, and I'll have a share issue which will be funded by you guys. £640 a share, and the Celtic fans fell over themselves to buy them, right? Oversubscribed. But he laid it out in layman terms. This is what I'm going to do. Now I want Dominic Mackay, his first State of the Nation address, to give us a 3, 5, 7 year plan. Tell us where we're going, right? Tell us where we're headed. I don't want this together. If we work together, we can get there. Tell us where we're going. Tell us where that there is. Will we move forward? I want to know where the place is that we're moving forward to, right? So if he comes in and does that, and then secondly, as Laura said, do what you're good at. He's coming from a commercial and a marketing background. Do not get involved in the football side of the operation. Leave that to the manager, who you're now going to be responsible for choosing. They have areas and fields of expertise for a reason. So let the manager do the football side of things, because we will get success. if you leave the manager to do the football side of the operation, as we've spoken about before, with Stein and Rodgers.
That's the key to any good team, is the well-defined roles and the communication between.
Exactly, right. Don't meddle in the football side of it. Right, it's also. Go on, Jim.
So also, I said last week, I said that thing that I would like to know is what's the vision for the club.
Yeah.
It was interesting. The quote I seen this morning from Dominic Mackay was he was very impressed by the vision. So obviously there's a vision there. We've not been told what the vision is. So the first thing would be to actually, what is the vision?
Tell us the vision. Tell us where we're going. Don't be reactionary. Said last week, be a bit more visionary, which is why I'm saying, seeing your first address to the Celtic supporters, tell us everything. Be as open as you can with them and say, this is where I see is now, this is where I see is in. Give them a specific time period. Celtic supporters can accept periods of failure, but as long as they're trying and they're going about it in the right direction and you know what they're trying to achieve, that's fine. You can't win them all. And as you say, Jim, that club like the other, I would add the dash ambition to that, because at the moment in time there seems to be no ambition. You know, they were happy to dominate domestically, but in Europe there seemed to be no ambition. And the one word that annoyed me when Frimpong left the club, he talked about ambition. See, if you're not ambitious as a Celtic Football Club, you want to chuck it. Because to Celtic supporters, there is no other ambitious club in world football. I know that's certainly not a reality or a truism, but in your mind and the way you feel about this football club, there shouldn't be another ambitious football club out there other than Celtic. And if Frimpong's left for reasons like that, then people upstairs really do need to have a look at themselves. You know, and Lennon has said there's other players that feel like that. You know, Frimpong's also left because he's not been coached properly. You know, and players will also leave because they're probably not being coached properly. But that goes back to your chief executive who's leaving, appointing a manager in the showers after the aftermath and euphoria of a Scottish Cup win. You know, not doing your duty.
I think that goes back to the vision thing.
That draw and saying all the managers that were supposed to have applied. Sorry, Jill, go on.
I think that goes back to the vision thing, Tony. In terms of expectations, you have to manage the fans' expectations. Because we don't know what the vision is, then maybe our expectations are too high. And we've had a chat about that before, Paul, but your expectations may be different from mine. So if you actually know what the expectations of the club is, then you can then manage the fans' expectations. You won't always achieve what you're setting out to do, but at least if you've got a vision there and the expectations there, then we all understand it. What I said last week, in one of the many conversations we said that if I was in charge of Celtic, I wouldn't spend more than £5 million on one player. Because if I did that, there's something wrong with the youth system and the scouting system. So you get the scouting system right, you get the youth system right, you don't have to spend silly money. But I don't know how the scouting system works. I don't know how the youth system works. I don't know. And it'd be good to know a wee bit more about it. Don't have to tell us everything, but it'd be good to know about how they go about things. Because that's the future of the club. Vision, expectations.
You know, when we're talking... you go, Laura.
Yeah, I would say the only concern that I have is a situation where maybe the CEO comes in, the new guy, and sort of says, well, I want to assess things, I want to see where we are and what's happening, and therefore Neil Lennon by default keeps his job. We're all talking about there needing to be changes on the football side, and I think that is a major issue. I'm just concerned that there's going to be a situation where he decides to assess things rather than take action, unless this has all been going on in the background, which it must have been, and he's identified a person to come in and do the job that he wants done. That is what I hope's happened. I would hope there's a manager lined up as well, because what I don't want to happen is for Neil Lennon to remain in charge because of a default situation where he just wants to come in and bed in, because it's just going to leave us stagnant for months, maybe even a couple of years to come.
Now, on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, Lawrence actually pointed out that next season we might still have Neil Lennon in charge, and he planted that seed in my mind, and it's kind of burrowed a hole in my mind, to be fair. But yesterday when I was talking to JP, I was talking all around the fact that there would be, I'm almost resigned to the fact there'll be no change in management between now and the end of the season. Because I think what Peter Lawwell does well, and it's obviously at the top of the show, Tony gave him credit for this, is he ensures the financial stability of the club. So the way that I was looking at this yesterday is that Peter Lawwell is making sure that Celtic get through this first and foremost in as strong a position as they can. And he's not looking in terms of trophies, he's looking in terms of the balance sheet. So when we come through COVID, when things get back to closer to normal than they have been, Celtic will be here, we will survive. There won't be a massive hole in terms of finance that will exist in other teams. Now, I think that's his priority, and because of that, we're not going to go through this process of removing Neil Lennon and his staff from their positions and then bringing in someone else and potentially paying Compo for that. So I actually have now resigned myself to the fact, particularly after today's news, that there's going to be no changes other than the big change that was announced between now and the end of the season in terms of the football side of the club. I think transfer-wise, it will be minimal. I do expect maybe another one to go out, but in terms of people coming in, it will be minimal. Now, Jim, I'm going to come back to a point you made because I don't want to skirt over it. We were talking about some of the things that Peter Lawwell didn't do as well, because we have a tendency when someone goes to eulogise about their successes, 9 in a row, quadruple treble, and we've taken all that on board. But you mentioned something there in relation to the downfall of the Rangers and how that was managed and the after effects of that, because obviously things will never be the same again. Now, what I would ask you, Jim, and again, obviously, what another subject that might come into this is the failure to deal with Resolution 12/11, which seems to have been buried, kicked so far down the road and completely buried. What do you think Peter Lawwell should have done?
I think it was quite straightforward. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, there was the White trial, where all this stuff came out in the court of law, where the chairman of the club concerned admitted in open court under oath that they didn't submit the documentation to the SFA because they knew if they submitted that documentation they'd be in trouble. They admitted to not paying tax because they knew if they did that they would be in trouble. And the SFA have rules and regulations that if you don't do these things and you play any of these players, it's a 3-0 defeat. That's the rules. That's the rules. And what we're not asking for is any favours, and this is not a rant, we're not asking for any favours, just apply the rules. Just apply the rules. And it's not just us that were involved in this rigged game. Every other club was involved in that. And if you take somebody like the 2008 Cup final, Queen of the South. Queen of the South get to their first ever Cup final. Dumfries is emptied. They're all going to the Cup final at Hampden. And by the way, the Cup final was delayed for 2 weeks to let Rangers catch up with their fixtures, partly due to the fact they'd cancelled a couple of games beforehand for no reason. So they play this Cup final at Hampden and they lose 3-2, the biggest day in Queen of the South football history. And they lose 3-2, and every single one of those Rangers players was registered. So they were cheated at the Scottish Cup. Now, you wouldn't expect Queen of the South to challenge the SFA because they're a wee diddy club, to call them that. We could have challenged them. We're a big club, but we're a big diddy club because we didn't challenge them. Why didn't we challenge them? I have no idea. And no one's explained as to why we didn't challenge them. Because there's all these trophies and all these cups, they really should be ours. Because they say Chiefs never win, but Chiefs actually did win. And all this stuff is out in the court. And it's well known. So why didn't we challenge it? Because there was something going around on Twitter last week or so where it showed what's happened in the last 20 years. And in those last 20 years, there was 50 wee circles with Celtic on them and 5 wee circles with Rangers on them. 2003, 5, 9, 10, 11. And it's been proved that we're cheating. And what I would have done was Peter Law, because Peter Law is meant to be quite well in with the guys in UEFA. Why hasn't he dropped him a line, simple line to say, here's a transcript from a court case, if you cheated, here's the SFA rules, against the rules. Therefore, I can't imagine in any other country in the world that you wouldn't then take those trophies away from the team that's cheated and give them to the team who are second or runners-up, Why wouldn't you do that? The Peter Lawwell's not done that, or Dermot Desmond's not done that, and they've not explained to the Celtic fans why they haven't done that. So, 3 words, shame on you. Shame on you for not actually doing anything about that. That's my rant over.
No. The thing I would say about that is, though, that cheaters definitely don't prosper. I mean, they ended up dying, for want of a better word, in 2012. It did come back to bite them eventually, regardless of anybody's inaction. I just personally find today a bit more of a day to focus on what might be happening going forwards. We've got a new young guy, hopefully with some fresh ideas, appears to have been successful in his previous job. We've been calling for this change for however long, and it's come today, and I think it's a day for looking to the future.
Laura,
I think the events... Laura, you have to look to the future, but the question was, what's Peter Lawwell's legacy? And I've got a few mates of Rangers fans, they'll give me the 55 stuff. And they'll never convince me of the 55 stuff, in the same way that I'll never convince them that it's not 55. And this is the legacy. 55 is down to Peter Lawwell. That's who it's down to. Now, again, I'm not, as I said, having some sort of rant. These are all facts. I'm not making these things up. My question is a dead simple question. Why did Celtic Football Club not do anything about that when they were cheated for over a decade? It's a dead simple question. That's the legacy. Before you go, tell us why you didn't do anything about that.
Well, it's only
we should look for you guys there. Sorry, when you go
a question that Peter Lawwell can answer, isn't it, Jim? And he's no answered it in the 9 years that have preceded the downfall of Rangers in 2012. It's highly unlikely that he's going to answer it now.
And also, Paul, you mentioned Resolution 12. I mean, there's a bunch of guys who spent the last 7 years, a lot of the last 7 years, trying to get Celtic to do what Celtic should have done. And these guys have spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to get Celtic to do the right thing. And Celtic have messed them about. It's appalling, absolutely appalling how they've been treated. That's for me the legacy. Yeah, you guys coming on board, we wish you the best of luck and hopefully things get better. But in terms of legacy, for me, that's the legacy.
Laura, you were talking about looking forward. Now, when you look at the events of the last few weeks, obviously the massive thing is that we've lost the league. I think we're all accepting of that. But the flip side of that is off the field issues, the Dubai debacle, and everything that happened after that, the criticism that followed the apology from Peter Lawwell, the outburst by Neil Lennon, the disconnect between the supporters and the club. Do you think that sped up this announcement? I don't think it sped up the decision, but the actual announcement itself.
It wouldn't surprise me, because I think we're in a position where much more deliberation and much more delay in deciding what was happening going forward was only just going to result in more unrest among the supporters. We've talked before about season ticket sales coming up for renewal, and that being a particular issue that, had things remained the way they were, perhaps that wouldn't have gone as well for the club as they would have hoped. My suspicion is that that's probably one of the main motivations behind the timing of the announcement, is to try and secure some sort of bedding of positivity from the support going forward and a reason to renew your season ticket if you were at all thinking about not doing so. I think that one of the other advantages of Dominic Mackay, the brief amount of reading I've done about him, is he actually came into Scottish Rugby as a communications and public affairs consultant and sort of chief of that department before he made the step up to head honcho overall. And so one of the things that I want him to bring into the club as well is we've been crying out for communication from the club, and communication of a certain type. It's been appalling this season, the statements that have come out, the names that Celtic fans have been called by our own club, the way we've been held in contempt by some of the people within the club. What I would hope happens going forward, regardless of whether it is all lip service or not in the first instance, I hope it's not lip service obviously going forward, but what I would want is more communication and more appreciation of what the support are trying to say and what the support are trying to communicate. And hopefully with his background, that's something that Dominic Mackay can bring in.
You know, Tony, when we're talking about the future, we're looking ahead. One of the big things that struck me, obviously, about Dominic Mackay is the fact that he does seem to have a knack of listening to what the fans want. I mean, he speaks about that himself. I think, like everybody else, all morning I've been spending my time trying to find interviews with him. But he did have this vision that Jim speaks about, and the vision that you've spoken about today as well, Tony. And I hope that he does address the Celtic supporters. I hope there is a completely different approach, because I feel, as a Celtic fan, a great deal of contempt from the club rather than this engagement. I feel as though there's a contempt towards the Celtic support. Do you think that's going to be one of the biggest changes that we're going to see immediately? Is this communication that Laura talks about?
Yeah, the first thing when you look at anything about Dominic Mackay or you do any kind of background there is, the first thing that springs to mind is these words: a heavier focus around fan engagement. Might be slightly different in a rugby sense, because there's alcohol allowed in state stadium and all that kind of stuff, right? And he's also he's very pro bringing alcohol back into ground and stuff like that. But that statement itself shows you that he's willing to listen. And if he's willing to listen, and he is purportedly a Celtic supporter, so he is now a kind of fan representative on the board. And if he spent all his life listening to fans of another sport, then it's a transferable skill. All he's doing is going from rugby to the football pitch. And if he's willing to engage with supporters and listen, then surely he'll take on their views. And he's swapping a scarf for a club tie, but it doesn't make him any less of a fan. And again, we spoke about this last week, having someone who's willing to communicate and have their ear to the ground with what the fans are saying. And as Laura's pointed out as well there, and Jim too, the fans have a massive voice. And if one thing that could earn them real brownie point for the Celtic supporters is listening, coming out and saying, what would you like to happen? This is my vision, and this is where I see where we're going, and I see what's going to happen in the future. But what would you like to see happen? And see if he just listens and engages, then that's a start.
The other thing I was going to say as well was I watched an interview that was circulating about his recapping on what he'd done with the Scottish rugby game, and one of the things I was really encouraged to see was he introduced that kids getting in for £1 type of thing. And, I'm not saying that that's something that financially Celtic will be able to do. Rugby and football are two completely different sports, but it speaks to an appreciation of the values of Celtic Football Club that we have been told are presently on the board and presently with the people who are representing the club, despite them doing things this season and previously that completely fly in the face of that. So hopefully he can reintroduce an ethos and a kind of way of working that is more supportive and more indicative of the values that we all like to say that we have.
He's very proactive in various things. I mean, he was the guy that brought the Pro 14 final to Celtic Park, right? Brought more revenue into the club, right? He was the guy that facilitated Celtic's move to Murrayfield when Parkhead was being used for the Commonwealth Games. He brought the Liverpool-Napoli game to Murrayfield. So he clearly does show that he can listen and communicate, and he's got some real transferable skills there, as I've said. And that's quite an impressive track record for someone who is not totally involved in football. But he's obviously been able to see the crossover, and he's worked with football people and Celtic. And if Celtic's his club of choice, then great. And if he is such a Celtic supporter, go and prove it. Shows your ambition. Well, go on, Jim.
It's obviously a very similar job that he's coming to, so he should be able to hit the ground running with this stuff.
Yeah,
and without trying to overcomplicate things or overcomplicate things that we as fans have mentioned half a dozen things the club should be doing. Simple things. You don't have to be a genius to come in and start doing these 5 or 6 simple things.
And see if he listens, Jim, and he implements maybe 2 or 3 of them, then there's cause for optimism moving forward. Not implement them all, but see if he just shows a willingness to engage. And as you say, you mentioned 6
which is dead simple. Dead simple thing to do.
You open your ears. You don't treat your fans as customers. You treat them as fans. You treat them as supporters, because you're a supporter on that board and being given the role that you're acting on behalf of the supporters. And if you're a supporter and it gets you the way it does you and I, then having this club guy in this position, this exalted position, it should really get into his bones, seep into his bones, and he should be like, he should be the happiest man in the world at this moment in time. He's just assumed the most important position apart from the managers and players at Celtic Football Club.
Absolutely. Now, one of the big things that I've already mentioned is that we need an entire overhaul of the recruitment policy and strategy at Celtic Football Club. Now, part of that is that someone in the position of the incoming Dominic Mackay shouldn't have the same involvement in these deals as the outgoing Peter Lawwell. Now, Jim, you've already spoken about the legacy or the blots in the notebook of Peter Lawwell. I think another big one on the football side of things has been this issue around recruitment. I mean, he's been a pseudo director of football himself. Do you think Celtic will need to employ a director of football and restructure the whole football department, Jim, for us to develop and for us to move on?
Well, I think the thing is, being just fans, we're just trying to guess what's going on just now. So do we actually know what the contents of this review actually cover? Are we going to be told what that's about? Because the appointment of Dominic Mackay is a kind of business decision. It's not really a football decision. And what I said last week, if you're going to go after any good chief executive, he'll be in work just now, and that will take you 6 months before you get the guy. So are we really saying nothing's going to happen for 6 months? Or as Laura said, there's things going on in the background just now. Could we have maybe brought in maybe a football consultant, somebody like Arsene Wenger or somebody, for a month just to look at the whole club? So who's actually conducting this review? And what are the qualifications of that person to conduct the review? And will we hear the results? Because, we can talk about scouting and we can talk about youth development and recruitment and all that kind of stuff. Is that the things that have been looked at just now? Or was it just about having a new chief executive and maybe a new management structure? Again, we don't know because we're just fans. We're just trying to guess. I would like to think the whole thing's been looked at and a decision has been made that we're either going to have, as you said, Paul, a new director of football and a head coach, or we're going to stick with a kind of football manager structure. Be good to know what it's going to be. Again, the point we've made before, be good to tell us. Just tell us what you're thinking of doing so we can manage your expectations.
What do you think in terms of managing expectations, Tony? The Celtic fans, despite the announcement today, are still looking for a response, the results of this review. Do you think that today's events changes everything? We're not going to get any update. This is your update. We're making big changes. I would still expect them to come out and tell us what the situation is on a managerial level with Neil Lennon.
The final insult would be not to give you a response to the review or an answer to the review. That'll be the final insult on the season, which has been catastrophic, disastrous. Mm-hmm. The fans are entitled to see the results of that review. They really are. Because they, as I said last week, they never took a refund. They shelled out their door. There's people, when I said, that might not have a job at the end of all this pandemic. So I think they're entitled to some sort of answer as to what the results of this review. They have to publish them or communicate some kind of answer. And as for the manager, the four of us here know that his time's up. His time is up. Results get you the sack. Right? And the results this season haven't been good enough. And I'm like Laura, I'd like to think that this is the first brick in the new kind of building blocks, that they have been scouting a manager in the background. It would be churlish to think, it would be stupid to think that they weren't doing that. But again, it's Celtic. Nothing surprises you with Celtic. They just don't do things the way a big club should. As I said last week, they are masquerading as a big club at this moment in time. But hopefully this is the first step to them addressing some real issues and problems that they have in the club. And as you say, the first step on the rebuild. But how could they not be looking at a new manager at this moment in time? The manager who 2 days ago said the players want to leave the club. Yeah. This is a Celtic manager. Mm-hmm. selling one of your up-and-coming talents for a lot of money, who's told you he's went to a more ambitious club than Celtic, but he's left because he's not been coached. He's actually regressed. Can you imagine Frimpong under Brendan Rodgers? They'd have sold him for 25 million quid. Like, something has gone wrong at all levels here. The board, managerially, and with the playing staff. So you start with the first building brick, you get in a new CEO, fine. And as long as that's followed by some manager of repute, and if Dominic Mackay's worth his salt, then you might think it's worth investing a lot of money in a manager of repute.
Laura,
my hopes.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura has spoken previously about the implementation of a different model, a different way of thinking at Celtic. I've had a think about it, Laura. What do you think would be the time, or does it go back to what Tony says about tell us your vision? What time would Celtic fans allow the club to go through, let's say, 1 season to 3 seasons without domestic success? If you are trying to implement a new model, are Celtic fans going to demand results immediately? Are we patient enough to say we understand that we might not win the league for another season after this one? How long do you think the Celtic support is willing to wait, or does that again come down to the effectiveness of the communication from the new man?
Listen, I think the main thing that we have to acknowledge here is that we are the club with the biggest amount of resources in the country. I think even in a situation where we are having a major overhaul and trying to implement new systems and new ways of working, there's really no excuse for us not to be able to provide success throughout that period. You know, I think a lot of the smaller clubs in the country would scoff at the idea that we think that it's going to affect our level of success because of having to implement some of these things. As far as for timescale of these things, I was having some very grand ideas about, completely overhauling the way in which we work, focusing on youth academy development, developing those players, or buying extremely shrewd, cheap business elsewhere, developing that and then selling it on at a high price. A lot of people said, it was kind of pie in the sky stuff when I said it the first time, but I would be satisfied with a model that allowed us to be regularly successful domestically with the occasional very, very good run in Europe. I think that's all that most Celtic supporters want out of their club at the moment. It's certainly more than we've been getting in recent years. And as far as things go, like I said, timescale could be, you could be talking over the next decade as far as implementing these changes, but I don't think, obviously, that we can forgo domestic success in that situation. And I don't think we would have to, because, like I said, resources are there that we should be able to still maintain that in the meantime.
But, Laura, why can't they be successful on both domestic and the European front?
At the moment, I think it's partly down to what I was saying before about the youth development and the coaching and the standard of managers that we've had previously. I mean, Brendan Rodgers is the highest standard of manager we've probably had in for certainly since Martin O'Neill and since Jock Stein before him, probably. I think what we are noticing as far as European football is concerned is the way that other clubs are operating caters much more to European football and how it works. We are not very savvy when it comes to that. You see us play and we lose a lot of late goals, and we don't appear to know how to play when we go ahead in big European games. We just seem very naive, and that's even on the basis of having relatively regular European football. So whether it takes bringing a more international type coaching setup in behind the scenes, never mind just on the field, that's probably the only thing that's going to help us, and that can hopefully rub off on our domestic coaches and players.
A new manager would need to address an away record in Europe as well, which is absolutely, utterly appalling. How can Celtic be one of the few teams that can't go away from home and get a result? It's staggering, it really is. But again, a new manager would set them up to play in a set way in order to get results. So I agree with what you're saying, Laura.
The other thing that somebody raised the other day was like when Okoflex and some of the other players were coming into the first team, they didn't know how to play the system because it wasn't the same system they were playing in the youth teams. If you look at a Barcelona or an Ajax or one of the big teams, Bayern Munich, they teach the same systems, the same ways of playing from the under nines right the way up, so that if there's a one-off chance that a 17, 18-year-old has to come into the first team, they know what their role is, they know what they're doing, and they're probably doing it with better players, so they should fit in even easier.
That's whole vision. That's good, getting everything right. That's about getting the youth development right. It's putting the right players in to deal with youth development. Now, the people we have at the moment are ex-players. Is that the best to look after the youth? I don't know if it is. We must look at other clubs in Europe. Clubs that have done this before. Get their guys in.
But Jim,
Tony?
Sorry, if you, Laura, and I are pointing that out, why is no one at the club seeing that? Why is, and then we're seen as troublemakers? We don't understand how a football club works. Well, actually, we kind of do, because we're offering solutions. We're not just throwing problems out there. You know
exactly.
what I mean?
I think most things are quite simple. I think you don't want to overcomplicate things. So we need a youth system. Who's actually got a good youth system? If it's Ajax or whoever it is, go and get a couple of youth coaches from there, bring them over, implement their practices. Who's got a good scouting system? Get their guys in, do some scouting. Who's a good manager? Get him in. Just do the simple things.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're doing your homework, you would go to Ajax and look at it all from the top to bottom. You would go to Germany, which is the Bundesliga is the fastest rising league in Europe. Go and see what they did. You know, after they get hammered in one of the World Cups, and they say to themselves, right, this stops. We restructure our whole football from grassroots up. I mean, surely somebody else should appoint somebody to say, I'm going to Ajax, I'm going a year, I'm taking a year sabbatical and I'm going on a mission to look at all these clubs, look at their youth systems, as Laura says, and look at their coaches, learn, absorb, get a sponge, just take everything down and come back and see, right, this is what Ajax do, this is what they do in the Bundesliga, this is what they do in La Liga, this is what they do in the French league, right? Now we know
Also, Tony, what I said earlier is, I think people like Ralph Rangnick has been mentioned in the past, and if you could get him, that'd be fantastic. But why not bring him in for a month and get him to review the whole club, top to bottom, pay him 50 grand, 100 grand, review the whole thing, because he's obviously a guy who knows what he's doing.
Go and ask his opinion, and also you should be going to him and ask, not only ask him if he wants a job, but go and say to him, look, Ralph, what would you recommend? You know, as you say, and you should pay him that consultancy fee, because he turned that club around, you know what I mean? So he's had a phenomenal success, and he's currently out of job. And as I said last week, playing in front of 60,000, or managing a club with 60,000 followers, is a bit of a powerful drug. Celtic is a manager's and a player's club. Now, you can't persuade Ralph Rangnick to do it, but, you know, give him a hard sell. You have to approach a guy like that. If he's currently out of work, approach Eddie Howe because he's currently out of work. Approach Rafa. And people think that these are pieing this. Why should they be pieing this guy? Go and ask them the question. Go, let them give you an answer and say, you know what, it's not for me. Fine, you can accept that.
My kind of main point was, even if you brought the guy in for a month, just to review everything that's happening, do a report on the whole club, top to bottom, youth development, recruitment, management structure, the whole thing. Pay him 100 grand for a month just to review the whole thing, and then implement them.
You would find it hard to part with them after a month, though. That's the thing, because they would come out with something.
That might be the wee hook. That might be the wee hook.
You know,
I'm going to bring this up, Tony. I've got to bring this up from Joe Porter. Lawwell will end up on next year's Dancing on Ice. There's probably more chance of that, Joe, than him ending up on Axom's Bulletin, even though we have approached them. But thanks for bringing a wee bit of humour to the discussion. Now, when I looked, I brought up a comment earlier on talking about him being a Celtic man, And there is one thing that I need to point this out. People talk about Peter Lawwell, and he becomes almost a caricature. He's been on the banners recently outside Celtic Park, but again, he is a Celtic fan. He is a Celtic fan because his team growing up was the Quality Street Gang. So I have had a discussion with him many moons ago about the fact that, he looked at players like George Conley, Kenny Dalglish, Danny McGrain, and he speaks about them passionately as a Celtic fan. But I think because he's been at the kind of sharp end, the business side of Celtic for so long, it doesn't come across like that, particularly, in that apology interview that he gave us. It just seems almost detached from Celtic supporters. But I think that can happen if you're so involved in an organisation and the criteria that you're trying to tick day in, day out isn't just making sure that there's a team on the park that's going to win all and sundry. It's everything else that goes with that. So he is definitely a Celtic supporter, and I'm pretty sure he will be when he leaves the club as well. Is it important, do you think, Tony, that at that level that you need a Celtic fan in place, or is it just a desirable? Because obviously we've heard that Dominic Mackay, Celtic season ticket holder. Do you have to have a Celtic state of mind?
I think it's a desirable. It's not important. It's the only important credential is to be a CEO, or can you do the job properly? And the last CEO was a Celtic supporter, you've just said there, and seemingly has Celtic in his soul, which we get chided by Ian Banky in the statement today, because I had a pop at Peter Lawwell last week saying he didn't have it in his heart and soul. He wasn't a Celtic man, he was a businessman. So I think that was a wee bad with this podcast, which is good. Shows he listens and he's aware of it. But no, I don't think it's not a prerequisite, it just helps. But Dominic Mackay will help himself by just not getting involved in the football business and just doing what he's brought to the club to do. With the commercial side, the marketing side, the financial side. And that's the one thing Dominic Mackay can learn from Peter Lawwell. Just take a step back. And as Jim said right at the top of the programme, be silent. Give your State of the Nations addresses when you have to. Speak when you have to. Listen, absorb. You don't need to be a faceless name. Being the CEO of Celtic. Because you don't have to get involved in a lot. You're involved in the day-to-day running of the club, but that's your area of expertise. That's why you've been employed in that job. Peter Lawwell became more than a faceless name because he would get involved in football matters. With Jim Feedy was coming out with
there's no doubt that Peter Lawwell's a big Celtic fan. But when he gets the job that he gets, then his loyalty is to that club, not the team at that point. He has to take a tough decision. And I think it's a hard. But he's certainly a Celtic fan.
Yeah. But I think I was making the point that last week that it didn't hurt him the way it hurt Celtic fans watching 10 in a row just disintegrate. And if you're that much of a Celtic man and you're pulling the purse string, you would have did something to address that, because it was happening from very early on.
I think the same applies to Neil Lennon as well. If he's such a Celtic man and has the club in his heart the way that he says that he does, and I'm sure that he does, he would put the club ahead of his own interests and say, I'm not the right person for this job, I'm not doing what I need to do anymore, and step aside. Now, there's myriad reasons why he might not do that, whether it's financial or otherwise, but, I think we all need to appreciate at the end of the day that it's probably, there's an element of it becomes a job, the same as anything when it is your job, and your supporter status takes a backseat to your desire to do your job well.
Of course, but there is an emotion and a bond that ties when you're talking about football clubs. It's like no other job. As Jim said, they hated like no other club, but it is. Celtic's just not a job. It's a feeling. It is heart and soul. It's heart, soul, mind. It's the very mention of the word. Your life's intrinsically linked with the football club. The minute you become a supporter or an employee or whatever, but it's still something that grips you like nothing else on earth. or it should.
I think the big mistake Peter Lawwell made was hitching himself to the Lenny bus back in November there. Because if I was Peter Lawwell, you could have said, we appointed Neil Lennon, he delivered on his objectives, won the League Cup, was through to the Scottish Cup semi-final, did well in the Europa League. We gave him a lot of money at the start of the season. It was down to him. And if Peter Lawwell had pulled the trigger sooner on Neil Lennon, I think he'd still be there.
Yeah, but Jim, you and I, Paul, John, Laura, can see that the trigger should have been pulled on Lennon a long time ago. After Ferencváros, we were talking about that, and possibly before, with the Rangers defeat in December and the Fraser Forster League Cup final. The warning signs were there very early that things weren't going too well, and they were just kind of chuntering along. And then came Ferencváros, then came Aberdeen, and then came the Rangers defeat without a shot on target, which to me is just completely unacceptable for a Celtic team to play a Rangers game and not have a shot on target. And ironically, Rangers have a shot on target at Ibrox. Still won.
If you go back to October, November, if it had pulled the trigger then, I think Peter Lawwell would have been able to say that I took the action.
Yeah. And
therefore I'm okay.
But my thing is, why can they not see what we're seeing? And we're not privy to, everything that's going on in the club. But we're watching on as a supporter.
I think Neil Lennon convinced Peter Lawwell that he would end up winning the league and doing the 10. And Peter Lawwell hitched himself to the Lenny bus, and that was a big mistake from Peter Lawwell's point of view.
And I get
pulled the trigger there. I think he'd still be there, as I said.
And I get what Laura's saying there. That was an instance of Peter Lawwell being completely and utterly detached in terms of doing a job and not being a supporter. Mm-hmm. You see, if you were being a supporter in your job, you would have saw that early on. And this calamitous season could have been avoided, or it could have been addressed, and it could have been a lot closer. And just even the spectre of a challenge, I think, would have been enough to not frighten Rangers per se, but they may have dropped more points than they have.
Yeah, exactly. Now, as we've been speaking on the Bulletin, there has been a press conference. I don't know if it's still ongoing. Neil Lennon has been spoken to by the press, so it'll be interesting to see what his reaction is. We're obviously not in that press conference, but we'll keep you posted on whether or not we ever are invited in. But, we're already getting, Roy Keane now 2-1 to be the next manager, thanks to that, Mark. And again, that is going back to this connection with the club, because for me, Roy Keane should be nowhere near the manager's job at Celtic Park. And the fact that his odds are so short astonishes me and actually frightens me a wee bit, because I don't want to see someone who is put in charge of the football club because of a connection to the club. I want to see the best possible manager that we can attract to Celtic Football Club, not someone because they have a connection either to Dermot Desmond or Celtic Football Club. Roy Keane is Celtic manager based on what? What's he done in management that would give him the job? The next appointment of a Celtic manager will show us exactly what the ambition is going forward. I hope, Tony, that they do spell out the vision. I think that's what it is. We keep having to guess what's happening next. So many of the comments are coming through in relation to, right, Lennon out next. I don't think it's going to happen now. I think that the club is just going to ride this out to the pre-season now. We're going to be doing that with Neil Lennon in charge. We're going to be served up the types of games that we got the other night that Laura and I covered against Hamilton, which wasn't a great spectacle for Celtic Football Club. And we're just going to have to suck that up to the end of the season. But come out and tell us that. Communicate to us.
Paul, I would gladly put up with Neil Lennon to the end of the season as long as they were doing their due diligence on a new manager, which myself and Laura have already spoken about, and then say at the end of the season, Neil, thank you for everything. It's time to go. And that new manager has been, as Jim's saying, maybe been approached and doing his own recce and everything that's going on. But at least someone coming in that they have approached, and someone that comes in and says, well, actually, I was approached about this back in January. I've been working behind the scenes. I know everything about the club. Right? Because see, if they do leave it to June and then they bring somebody in, then it's the same cycle. You're getting into the Champions League qualifiers unprepared, probably get popped out by some no mark, and ad nauseam repeat. You know, we want somebody to come in that's going to make a difference. You say, and if the CEO can tell us that, Dominic Mackay, then all the better. But limping on with Neil Lennon and them doing nothing about it, it wouldn't surprise you, because it's what they've did all season. They've just limped on in the hope that things get better.
I said a few weeks ago we were in limbo, and we're still in limbo unless we're actually told what's happening next. I mean, that's good. We've got a new guy coming in the summer. We need to know a bit more than that. What's the results of this review? What did it cover? Where do we go next? Just tell us the vision.
And as far as Roy Keane's concerned, he's one of the best pundits in telly. He should stay there. He should stay in the Sky Sports studio. Don't come anywhere near Celtic Park.
Yeah. I agree with that.
That's disappointment.
Wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I'm looking at the football side of things. Obviously, we've got a game tomorrow, but today will be dominated by the announcement that Peter Lawwell has retired from his role at Celtic Football Club. He's going to be here until June, and he will then be replaced by Dominic Mackay. Yeah, I welcome fresh ideas, a new perspective on things. For me, it doesn't matter that he's not coming from a football background, because a lot of this corporate stuff that he will be dealing with is business, and hopefully he can stick to the business side of it. People have differing views on how to remember Peter Lawwell. I think we've given him enough credit today at the start of the show, and we've also looked at some of the negatives during his tenure at Celtic Football Club. It's always a pleasure to hear everybody's views, so thanks for getting involved on Twitter, Facebook and on YouTube. But thank you to Laura Bradburn, Jim Orr and Anthony Haggerty for joining me once again on A Celtic State of Mind.